Welcome to part 6 of our class, Understanding People. The focus of this part of our class is on the human relations side of leadership. Many of the great theorists and practitioners of this area were Peter Drucker and Ken Blanchard. Abraham Maslow is probably the father of human relations because of Maslow's hierarchy. Warren Bennis, Francis Likert, the Likert scales, and Douglas McGregor. It's from the McGregor and Likert through and Maslow are the three of the more psychologically oriented founders in this area, and Blanchard, Drucker, and Bennis are more the management oriented founders. So the human side of leadership, the human side of work, is really a combination of psychology and management. What we want to understand is the relationship between the individual, their environment, and human behavior. The individual is made up of biological and psychological factors, whereas the interaction between the individual and the environment is known as human behavior. So we look at all aspects of that interaction. And this is interaction with both human and non-human elements of the environment. This is an interesting exercise. This is exercise 12-2 in your text. We're going to look at something called a motivation graph. And the motivation graph is going to be matched to Maslow's needs. So what we're going to graph here is need strength versus motivation levels. Motivation levels correspond to Maslow's needs. And so the need strength, or where you rate yourself on this particular exercise, is very important because, as we'll see, the higher the rating, the less that need is being adjusted. So a sample motivation graph might have low on motivation level 1, a little bit higher, highest on level 3, next highest on level 4, and then kind of low on level 5. And so what this means is that this person is motivated to fill a level 3 need at their particular work, and that's where really what we're measuring here. And then the next motivation is to fulfill a level 4 need. The first motivation level is survival needs. This is sufficient pay, safe working conditions, safe equipment, tools, materials, supportive physical environment, just basic survival. Good lighting, heating, air conditioning, restrooms, clean water, that kind of thing. Second motivation level is security needs. These are proper tools and equipment, job aids, economic protection, and job security, confidence in management. And this is protection from predators. Lions aren't going to come and eat you while you're working. The third motivation level is belonging needs. Communication sessions between employees and management, celebration of special events, expressions of consideration and appreciation, job participation, vehicles, things that are participating in your work, communication outlets, open door policy. We saw in the example that this was an unmet need because the motivation level was to fulfill these needs. You feel very motivated to fulfill these needs at work. So that means that the environment that's being provided is not allowing you to fulfill these needs, which is rather interesting. The fourth motivation level is respect needs, and this is individual incentives for high performance, public acclaim for outstanding contributions, opportunities to improve job status, tangible rewards like increased pay, bonuses, increased status within the organization in terms of prestige, day-to-day recognition, praise for a job well done. And finally, the fifth motivation level is fulfillment needs. And this is where the opportunity for personal growth is being met. And the individual values and goals are aligned with the organization, and they're being realized. And so we see this is correlated to Maslow's hierarchy, which has at its base survival, security, belonging, respect, and fulfillment. And it's interesting, the first two, survival and security, are those that are fulfilled externally or extrinsically, but belonging, respect, and fulfillment are intrinsic needs. And so they're fulfilled in different methods. Before we talked about extrinsic and intrinsic rewards and extrinsic and intrinsic factors that result in good leadership practices. Now we see why these make a difference, because of the way that these needs are laid out here reflects the human psyche. So if we go back to our example, we can see that the highest levels indicate belongingness needs that are not being met. In other words, there's a high motivation around those in the particular workplace. Needs are hierarchical. In other words, generally, as the lower level needs are satisfied, the higher level needs come into reality. In other words, you're not really worried about security if you're focused on survival. And if you're focused on security, you're not really worried about belonging to other people. But if you have security and survival, then you can focus on belonging. So there are 15 points that we can get from this particular hierarchy, this particular understanding of human motivation. First is that personal needs motivate behavior. Behavior is motivated either through the satisfaction or the lack of satisfaction of personal needs. Maslow's needs hierarchy provides a framework for understanding motivation based on needs. Second point is that a satisfied need is not a motivator. Once a need has been satisfied, your motivation to continue to satisfy that need is dissipated, and that's why that graph works the way it does. Third is that motivation levels explain workforce behavior. If people are motivated in certain ways, then they're going to want certain things, and that's really what's going to be driving their behaviors. Self-actualization is the normal sequence of development for people. They strive to fulfill the needs moving up the hierarchy such that they can achieve self-actualization. Many people in developing countries never make it past the first one or two, survival and safety or security. So they may make it into belongingness, but if you're focused on living in extreme poverty or living on $1 or $2 a day, you probably don't really care much about the upper level social needs. People experience needs on all 5 motivation levels. You can see that they exist for everyone. They are drivers of behavior, whether we like it or not. We're concerned with them to different degrees, depending on how well we have fulfilled our needs. But they are a constant in our experience. In other words, we are composed of them. They are drivers, they are motivators for behaviors, but we tend to be more focused on moving up the hierarchy, satisfying the lower level needs, then our motivation moves up to satisfy the higher level needs. Psychological needs and social values are not the same. Social values may emphasize certain needs. In fact, social values determine the way in which needs are met in a particular social setting. Different needs influence behavior at different times during a person's day and life, and depending on where you are, different needs may come into play. You may become aware of different needs at different times. They become more important or less important. And you can go back up and down, back and forth on that hierarchy, depending on where you are in your life. The same act can satisfy any of the 5 motivation levels, and in some of the work I've done in branding, what you see is that the more levels that a particular brand can address, the more successful it is, because people are more motivated to purchase that product or the service. And so even around organizations, the more levels of needs that the organization's brand, even with Greenpeace or some of the other ones, can satisfy, then the more likely people are to be attracted to that organization. All people have the same needs, but to different degrees and accompanied by different wants. So the need is the sort of core essence, but the wants determine how much of that exists within a person. A person may need some social interaction, but they may not want that much, depending on their personality and depending on their particular social context. A person can be deficiency motivated, bringing harm to self and others. In other words, they can be motivated for negative needs. Unsatisfied needs can make you ill as surely as if you were physically stricken. You can unless you're doing something to meet your needs at some level for all five, you are mentally unhealthy. Leadership is important because the idea is to make sure that the organizational context helps employees meet their needs and so thereby preventing motivation problems. And really, the simple thing of saying thank you is one of the most effective, least costly, and most overlooked methods of motivating people. And the ideal is to integrate the needs of the individual with the goals of the organization, and this requires careful matching and requires some psychological insight. You may want to, when you hire people, you may want to use exercise 12-2 to see really where these people are motivated. And motives are very powerful determinants of human behavior, and people can do what is almost impossible, that you would think it would be impossible to achieve when their motivation is powerful enough. These are some interesting books. You may want to pick them up. Toward the Psychology of Being, Maslow's The Road Less Traveled is really good. Happier is a fun book. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. That's a really interesting one. And The Power of Positive Relationships is really good. So we all have to deal with, in organizations, especially as leaders, we all have to deal with conflict of some sort. And so there's two ways we can deal with it. We can assess it by how assertive we're being and how cooperative we're being. If we plot these two on X and Y axis, we can see that if we have low assertiveness and low cooperativeness, we just tend to we just deny that conflict exists. But if we have high assertiveness and low cooperativeness, we seek to dominate, we win through intimidation. If we have low assertiveness and high cooperativeness, we seek to accommodate, seek harmony at all costs. And if we have high assertiveness and high cooperativeness, then we get into collaborative solutions for mutual benefit, win-win. Most leaders are in the green box here. They're in the compromise area, bargaining to minimize losses. And so this is what we see take place in many organizations. But the idea is to get out into collaboration where we get to more democratic, high involvement, high empowerment workplace. Emotional intelligence is another aspect of human behavior. This is put forth by Daniel Goleman. It consists of 4 aspects: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. You can actually go out and take an emotional intelligence test, your EIQ, emotional intelligence quotient, figure out where you need to develop your emotional awareness, become more emotionally savvy as you were, and learned how to understand the power of your emotions and how they influence your leadership performance. Diversity is another aspect of human behavior because social norms can drive behaviors, and they can also determine how expressions of needs are fulfilled in different cultures. Here's an example of, and they can also, well, before we get into the example, we can also get unintentional results when we assume that belief systems in different cultures are the same as our own. First example, a manager was pleased with a new breakthrough achieved by one of his Native American employees, and therefore he recognized her with a great fanfare and personal phrase in front of all the other employees. Humiliated, she didn't return to work for days because in the Native American culture, it's seen as a humiliation to be held up in front of others. It's more important to be part of the group. After learning that a friendly pat on the back would make employees feel appreciated, a manager took every chance to pat his subordinates. His Asian employees who hated being touched avoided him like the plague. And so you're kind of driving people away. And the third example, concerned about ethics, a manager declined a gift offered him by a new employee, an immigrant who wanted to show gratitude for her job. He explained the company's policy about gifts. She was so insulted that she quit. And these are kind of extreme examples, but they are examples of when unintentional results can come from hewing too closely to one's own culture, one's own ethical beliefs. And so we have to understand what the beliefs are in different cultures, and if we're going to have a truly different functions. So we need to be aware. What are the beliefs in different cultures? What beliefs do people hold around things such as gifts and touching and being rewarded? Be sure everyone's given the opportunity to participate in the best way that's appropriate for them. And this again is related to cultural awareness. Share the basic rules of the organization. If you're going to be part of the organization, here's the rules. If you can't abide by them, you have to either provide input to changing them or change the organization for you. And finally, be sensitive to differences. Understand the differences are there, and that may be the explanation for different levels of performance. Diversity has lots of benefits. It can increase workforce creativity by helping people to imagine things that they could never imagine on their own. It can provide a broader range of knowledge and skills and better decisions based on different perspectives, as long as those perspectives are honored and treated with tolerance and they're understood by leaders. They can get better services provided to diverse populations, because you can have different ways of approaching the same type of service. And you can get the ability to recruit excellent talent from the entire labor pool, because you're looking at people from a wide variety of backgrounds. Also, you are creating an environment, a cultural environment that nurtures the multicultural fabric of the community, which may reflect where you are operating. One of the most important things to understand about diversity and intergroup relations is the different levels that have taken place over time, and the different areas that different cultures and different organizations have functioned in. And this is a typology. On the left we have rejection and inhumanity. On the right we have acceptance and a more human approach. And so from the human relations, this is where we want to be. And if we can start on the left, we can see that the most inhuman response to intergroup relations is genocide. The dominant group tries to destroy the minority. A little bit less population transfer. An example of this is the Native Americans being placed on reservations. The dominant group expels the minority. An intermediate approach is internal colonialism, where the dominant group exploits the minority. This is like low-paid menial labor, or the illegal aliens coming from Mexico to work in the agricultural industry. A more positive, more human approach is assimilation, where the dominant group absorbs a minority, kind of a melting pot approach. And finally, the toughest probably approach to maintain, takes the most enlightened leaders, is pluralism or multiculturalism. This is where the dominant group accommodates racial and ethnic variations. This is things like Switzerland, and if you happen to live in San Francisco, you'll see that the Bay Area is and the West Coast in general, is a very good example of multiculturalism. So that's it for this week. If you have questions, please post them in the Q&A thread. Otherwise, we will see you in the class shell.